Support Media. Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of mountain stories. I hope you enjoyed this topic, because I've never done it before, and based on your feedback, we'll see if we'll do it again in future. I'd also like to welcome my good friend Papa Scare, who is joining us for tonight's collection of horrors. So it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Back in the summer of 2021, my family took a trip to Lake Liff in North Carolina. If you've ever been there, you know how breathtaking it is. The water is calm and glassy, ringed with forests and mountains that seem endless. The area is rich in Native American history, and the trails that snake through the mountains have been walked for centuries. We embarked on a hike one afternoon, the sky a blanket of gray, lending an oppressive quiet to the air. It wasn't stormy, nor was it sunny. The woods felt unusually unwelcoming. As someone not particularly athletic and with asthma, I often lag behind on hikes. This day was no different. My parents, siblings, and some family friends were ahead, maintaining their usual pace. Though I kept a slower rhythm, I wasn't far behind, yet I was alone enough that their voices had faded into the background hum of the forest. About halfway through the hike, as the trail curved around a ridge, I distinctly heard my sister's voice. She yelled my name, my birth name, not the nickname. She's called me since I was a literal baby, but my full formal name. And it didn't come from the trail ahead of me. It came from the woods, off to the side. The sound of it stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't playful, and it wasn't casual. It sounded urgent, almost panicked, like she needed me. And for a split second, my body moved, like it was about to head in that direction, to push through the brush and find her. But something in me froze. My sister isn't stupid. She would never wander off a marked trail, especially not in an unfamiliar forest, not even in an emergency. And the voice, the more I thought about it, the more it didn't sound exactly right. It was close enough to make me believe it was her at first, but there was something hollow in it, like a perfect impression missing, just a little too much humanity. My heart was pounding. By the time I caught up with the rest of my family, they were all clustered around a waterfall up ahead, sitting on rocks, snapping pictures, and laughing about something. My sister was there, safe and calm, chatting with my dad, like she had been there the entire time. I asked her if she'd call down for me. She just said no, and shrugged. She hadn't left the trail, and hadn't shouted anything. I didn't say much after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut if I'd have stepped off that trail that day. If I'd have gone chasing after whatever that was, I don't think I would have returned. I've never gone back to that trail since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. I don't know what called my name out there in those woods, but it wasn't my sister. If anyone here knows Appalachian folklore, especially anything tied to voices or mimicry, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I still don't have an explanation for what happened, but I've learned one thing. Never trust the woods when something inside it calls your name.
The Chocolate Guide or Trek in Peru isn't your average Inca Trail hike, a quieter, less-known route that leads to an awe-inspiring set of Inca ruins buried in the cloud forest. It's nowhere near as developed as Much, or Beach, or the TI track. There are fewer hostels, fewer checkpoints, and fewer people in general, and in some ways that's the appeal.
Pure wilderness and near complete isolation. But it also means that when things go wrong, they really go wrong. On my first night out, after a grueling day of switchbacks and humidity that soaked me to the bone, I was lucky enough to meet a local farmer who let me pitch a tent on his land. He even offered me water and a place to cook and electricity, a rare luxury. On that trail that evening, I ran into two other trackers, A guy and a girl in their mid-20s, both clearly seasoned travelers. They told me they'd met while backpacking through Bolivia and decided to do it together. They seemed in good spirits, sharing food and stories with me as we cooked and watched the sun go down over the ridges. We went to bed early, intending to rise before dawn to tackle the next mountain pass before the heat became oppressive. Exhausted, I fell into a deep sleep, only to be jolted awake, what felt like 30 minutes later, by an intense non-animalistic scream. It wasn't a cry of pain, but pure, uncontrollable terror. Barefoot and half asleep, I stumbled out of my tent. The man we had dinner with was on the ground, convulsing, vomiting violently, and screaming to the point of choking. The girl was sobbing and panicking. The farmer and his family surrounded him, offering blankets, buckets of water, and what appeared to be local remedies. My Spanish was too limited to understand their words, though I caught fragments like venom bite and poison. Had he eaten something bad or been stung? The area teemed with dangerous insects, tarantulas, scorpions, tarantula hawks, and many local farmers used heavy pesticides on their crops to deter them. It could have been anything. After about half an hour of pandemonium, his screaming stopped. They carried him into the farmer's house, and the girl, still trembling and sobbing, followed. The farmer's wife looked at me and told me to go back to sleep. I tried, but for the rest of the night I lay in my tent, listening to intermittent cries and groans echoing from the house, left to wonder if I should have gone back. Could I help? Should I run for help? But help is what? 15 miles down a mountain trail. I didn't move. I couldn't. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because when I unzipped my tent at first light, everything was gone. No sign of the couple's tent. No sign of the farmer or his family or their animals. The yard looked swept and clean. It was just quiet with mist curling over the hills. I left some money on a rock where the kitchen area had been and started walking. A few hours later, I passed a small village with a few older men and women sitting outside. The men were playing dominoes, and I asked if they'd heard about what had happened. One man, chewing poker leaves and barely glancing up, said matter of fact, "Sem," which means he died in the night. They took him out on a donkey. That was it. Just a man who screamed for hours in a remote patch of forest died and was carried out on the back of a donkey, wrapped in a blanket. Maybe the girl was nowhere to be seen and never found out her name. I still wonder if she made it out okay, if she kept hiking, or if someone came to get her. I think about that night often. I didn't know what to do. Maybe there was nothing to do. Maybe it was already too late. But I still remember lying there, listening to him die, his very last breaths on this earth, and then sleeping through part of it. That's the part that sticks with me. Shame in a way I can't explain. The area is breathtaking. The trail is what I'd highly recommend, but it's also dangerous and very far from help. If things go wrong up there, they don't get better. Generally, be careful on the trails. Some background before we start. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle. This means, for those of you unaware, that we have very short summers where the sun never sets and very long winters where the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness in the end and beginning of the year have made us into an understandably superstitious kind. There were many tales meant to safeguard us growing up. You have the mountain drawer, who steals children, who wander too far from their home. You have the mulling, who you'll not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby, and the knock who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown any unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16 years. I had just gotten my hunting license, and my father had even bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me, as I had always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but never had I actually shot grass myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors, and he can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a sore at his workplace and peeled the skin off his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up by himself and kept going. He did not consider going to the doctors to get it looked at before almost 2 weeks had passed, and the stench of the bandages had made him unbearable to stay in close proximity with. After weeks of recovery, including a skin graft, his hand was finally usable again. As the season changed and the sun graced us for a few hours each morning, my dad and I embarked on our journey to the cavern. The trip involved an hour's drive followed by another hour on a boat. Our cabin, you see, is nestled in a remote area, accessible only by ferry, as there are no roads leading to it. This unique access means we generally know who is in the area. Most visitors come for weekend stays when there are no holidays, and the ferry operates only on Fridays and Sundays during the week. Consequently, there are rarely more than a handful of people there at any given time, despite the area being roughly larger than my hometown. On that particular Friday, it was just my father and me on the ferry, assuring us a solitary weekend. As we arrived at the small pier by the cabin, I finally inhaled the crisp, untouched air of nature. This has always been a balm for my soul, a place where all troubles are left behind, rendered irrelevant by the wild. At the cabin, the only things that matter are the things that keep you safe, warm, and fed. We then dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip to the cabin that night. We mostly spent preparing new straps and lunch for the next day. My father told old stories of when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared in a ceremonial hunter's shot of single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do when the peace and quiet of the cabin comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning due to us just enjoying the calm of morning with no obligations. This would turn out to be a mistake. However, you see, the key point is to be out early so you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we arrived at the laver, imagine a winter version of a teepee that we had set up that summer next to a lake, which was now frozen. Of course, my father decided that he would take it easy that day and get there. We were warmed up so that when I returned from the mountain, there would be warm food and drink waiting for me. I had previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me, and still does not to this day. So I started walking up the mountain, overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes that were hanging in the cabin. This resulted in using way more time than needed to get up to where I could find some grouse I might shoot, as I knew from previous experiences this was an area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up, and the area, despite being full of tracks and feces, was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I could not hear or see anything. So I stalked to the forest upon that mountain for an hour without any traces of life. That is probably when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say. There's always this deafening silence that preludes something bad, like only animals know to get out of there. I remember for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there. But of course, I was not about to go back empty-handed to my father, so I continued as I was walking around, listening intently to any sound that might give away any other form of life. I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was a tall yet skinny boy, around 70 kilos, 54 pounds, even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible. The uneasy feeling creeping closer and closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack break to regain my previously calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, and I felt more relaxed and at ease. Again, I sat down on a rock and ate above chocolate that I'd brought and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked at what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps coming from the direction I had just been in, loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I know this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a biped walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from four-legged creatures such as moose or bears, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out because I immediately thought it was my father who had a change of heart, yet no reply. I sat there on the rock watching the direction of the footsteps as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out, and yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy again, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father there. On my phone, I had an unread message from my father delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch is ready. Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever was at the other end was not my father. This, coupled with knowing that we were supposed to be the only 2 people in a radius of many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I gripped my shotgun, and no doubt of there. As soon as I had tightened my snowshoes, as I was making way at all haste, I could hear whatever was stalking me pick up the pace, and I realized that the sound of my own footsteps, and whatever it was that was after me, it was almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference when our feet hit the ground. I realized since then that whatever it was had followed me since I had entered the forest on the mountain, and it was the cause of why I felt like my footsteps were being abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring that the thick layer of branches hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footfall no more than maybe 2 meters behind me. Yet when I turned around, there was nothing. I pushed all I had, and when I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side from the lavoo, the extra pair of footsteps just stopped, exhausted by the Kemi+ run in high snow. I made my way to lavoo. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred. So I said only that I'd spotted many tracks yet no birds. However, in later years, I've asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answer has always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it, and don't ask about it. Some things are better ignored. I've had a few close calls in the outdoors, enough to learn that the wilderness doesn't have to be supernatural to scare the hell out of you. Sometimes nature is more than enough. The first time I learned this, I was doing a solo trip in the Appalachians. I packed smart, or so I thought. Checked the weather for the nearest town and saw lows in the upper 40s. Totally manageable, and especially since I was staying at an open-face shelter halfway through the mountain. What I didn't realize is that the nearest town was about 2,000 feet lower in elevation than where I'd be sleeping that night. The wind picked up before I drug it in, and by midnight it was in single digits.
I was wrapped in every layer I owned, curled in a sleeping bag that wasn't rated for that kind of cold, laying in a drafty shelter with nothing between me and the night but a tar. I didn't sleep. I shook, shivering all night. I counted breaths and prayed I wouldn't have to hike with frostbitten toes.
That was the night I realized the mountain doesn't care. It doesn't care what your AB says, and it doesn't care what your gear cost. It just is. And if you screw up, it'll teach you the lesson. Personally, I thought that was the roughest night of my life where I nearly became a human popsicle. I don't think you understand the fear of thinking you are going to freeze to death.
I did a week-long solo backpacking trip through the northern high country of Yosemite National Park last summer. It was supposed to be a reset, just me and my gear, and back into the quietness of nature. And for the most part, it was incredible granite ridges that made you feel like a walk through a dream. Alpine lakes so clear, they looked fake, and that beautiful stillness only nature can bring. But there's one day of that trip that I still think about a lot, and I don't know if it was just psychological or if I really dodged something that night. But either way, Bear Valley changed how I look at the backcountry forever. I hit Bear Valley on day 4 of the loop. On the map, it looked harmless, a beautiful meadow with a winding creek running through it. It was around mid-afternoon when I dropped into the valley. Tonya was picturesque, quiet, too quiet. The wind had died completely, and even the birds had stopped. It was like the place was on mute. I stopped to rest near the creek, but I couldn't relax. Something felt off. I don't usually spook easy, but I kept checking over my shoulder, and that's when I noticed the signs. First I caught the scent musky animal, and heavy. Then I saw the scat, huge piles of it that were fresh, and then claw marks. At first I thought they were low on the trunks, maybe young bears, but as I walked, I saw more deeper gouges, and higher up some, at least 15 to 20 feet up the trees. One mark was so deep, it looked like someone had taken an axe to the bark. I don't know if you've ever seen a tree that's been mauled by something the size of a refrigerator, but it does something to your brain. This wasn't just bear country, this was their valley, and I their intruder. I kept walking faster than I should have, with that much trail still ahead of me. I had originally planned to camp there. It was the logical stop on the loop, but no way in hell. Every time I paused to check my map or sip water, I swore I heard something move behind me. A branch snap, a low rustle that stopped. When I stopped, it felt like the entire valley was watching me. I pushed through until well after dark. Every shadow looked alive. My legs were burning, my stomach empty. I hadn't eaten much that day, trying to ration my last few meals, and I hadn't seen another person in 2 days. I ended up doing nearly 20 miles that day, and by the time I made it out of the valley and found a spot to camp, I was shaking from hunger and exhaustion. Didn't even bother setting up my tent. I just rolled into my bag under a clump of trees and hoped nothing followed me. By the end of the trip, I'd lost 20 pounds. My family thought I was sick when they saw me. I'll never forget Bear Valley, not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't see. Because whatever lives in that valley doesn't want to be seen, and it doesn't want you there. In early September, a friend and I were backpacking deep in the backcountry of California, Sierra Nevada. If you've ever been there, you know how remote it feels once you're off the main trails. It's so quiet. It's almost like you can hear your own heartbeat. On the 4th day of our trip, something happened that I will struggle to wrap my head around. Up until that point, everything had been uneventful. We'd covered about 30 miles, and though we'd seen the occasional sign of a black bear, there hadn't been much to worry about. That morning, though, we dropped off the Pacific Crest Trail into a valley and almost immediately had a close encounter with one. Luckily, it went exactly the way you'd hope. It saw us startled and fled into the trees. As we made our way deeper into the valley, the bear sign grew more frequent. Fresh tracks, torn logs, claw marks higher up on tree trunks than I wanted to see. It was obvious this was bear country. By late afternoon, we reached a spot near a creek and decided it would be perfect to set up camp. That's when we noticed signs of someone else already there. Another tent gear spread out on a makeshift picnic table, even a cell phone sitting there, as if someone else had just stepped away for a quick errand. Our assumption was that whoever it was had gone for a day hike without packing up. Nothing too unusual there. We pitched our tent, pumped water, made coffee, and I was just getting ready to fish the creek when I noticed movement across the water. At first, I thought it was a shadow shifting in the brush. Then I saw a black bear's head rise above the bushes. It was watching us calm, not nervous at all about being seen, which in itself was unsettling. We studied it for a while, trying to decide what it was doing. It's when we noticed the torn open bear bag at its feet, human food scattered across the bank, and my stomach dropped. The brush was so dense, we couldn't see much beyond that. At first, in fact, it was pure luck. I'd even noticed the bear at all. It blended in so perfectly with its surroundings that someone could have camped right there and never realized it was watching. At first, we were more annoyed than afraid. We thought our unknown campmate had been careless, leaving food accessible in bear country. I walked nearly a mile up and down the trail, calling out, looking for them, but there was no sign of another hiker. When I got back, my friend and I decided we needed to drive the bear away. We weren't going to abandon camp just like that, and we armed ourselves with trekking poles and stood 20 to 30 feet from the bear and started shouting, banging, and waving, trying to make ourselves look big, but the bear didn't flinch. The only thing keeping us steady, with the cans of bear spray clipped to our belts. Without those, I think I would have packed up right then. After a while, the bear started to climb the embankment behind it. As though retreating, we thought we'd won. We gave it space and turned away, and that's when we saw it. The body, half in the creek, half on the bank. It took a long, sickening moment to understand what we were looking at. At first, I thought perhaps the bear had dragged the deer down there, but no, it was a human. The bear must have been trying to hold the victim uphill when the body slipped and rolled back into view. I can't describe the chill that went through me. It's one thing to think of bears as dangerous. It's another to watch it actively scavenging a person. We started packing camp immediately. It took maybe half an hour, and the entire time one of us had to keep our eyes on the bear. There was no denying it anymore. The bear was feeding, tearing at the body, utterly unfazed by our presence. Any doubt we'd had was gone. Before we left notes around camp warning anyone else who might wander in about the bear and the body. We rubber abandoned them to trees, rocks, and anything anyone might see. We even grabbed the abandoned phone, thinking it might help with identification. Then, against our better judgment, we made one last attempt to scare the bear off the victim. This time, it didn't back down. It came out of the brush, posturing, aggressively defending what it saw as its food. It was at that moment we knew we had to get out. Our new priority was getting cell signal. That meant climbing. So we hiked uphill 5 miles of a 2,000 feet of elevation gain, and by the time we found a single bar of service, almost an hour had passed. Even then, the calls kept dropping, but eventually We managed to get through and report everything. That night, we hiked 4 more miles to another campsite, and around 10,000 p.m., our headlights caught another bear's eye in the trees. That was the longest night of my life. The next morning, we hiked 9 more and gave our statements to the rangers. They confirmed what we saw, and they told us the bear had been killed the night before. As of now, no cause of death for the victim had been confirmed. Maybe the bear found them already gone. Maybe it was a fight over food. I guess we'll never really know. I'll never forget the sight of that bear standing guard of the body. It wasn't just an encounter. It was a reminder of how wild these places really are and how small we are inside of them. I was on a week-long backpacking trip in the Wawa Mountains in eastern Oregon, leading a group of middle school kids through some of the most breathtaking and unforgiving terrain I've ever seen. Alpine lakes, wildflower meadows, and knife-edge ridges that made you feel like the world just dropped away beneath your boots. We'd had an incredible week. Clear skies, no injuries, even if the kids were getting along, which is rare after that many days without a shower. But on the last day, the trail climbed along a steep ridgeline with nothing but a hard slope of loose shale and thin pine roots between us and a drop of at least 70 feet into the forested basin below. We were a single file, moving slowly. One of the campers, a shy girl called Lily, stepped just a little too close to the edge. Perhaps she was looking at the lake below, or maybe her foot slipped. I didn't see it happen. I just heard a scream, and she was gone. Also, I thought until I dropped my pack and lunged towards the edge and saw her clinging to a tangle of roots below the trail, legs dangling into open air. Her arms were stretched out, shaking. She looked up at me with those wild, wide, frozen eyes, too afraid to even cry. I grabbed both her wrists, planted my feet, and yelled for help. A couple of the older kids behind me dropped their poles and grabbed my backpack like a chain. The gravel was giving out under my boots, and I could feel the whole ledge shift under on combined weight. My calves were on fire, but Lily didn't say a word. She just held on, and then inch by inch, we pulled her up. When she was finally back on the trail, she collapsed into my lap. I held her for a full minute before either of us said anything. She wasn't even scratched, just shaken, but it could have been so much worse. 5 seconds more, one less route, and she would have been gone. We didn't finish the trail in silence, but no one joked around either. That ridgeline took something out of all of us that day. Later that day, we radioed out, and a rescue team met us at the bottom trailhead just to make sure no one was shocked or injured. They said that we were lucky. That stretch of trail had claimed hikers before even experienced ones. So yeah, Oregon is beautiful. The Walla was a magic, but those mountains don't care how old you are or how fit you are. If you're careful, you can be taken. I've debated posting this. It sounds crazy, but it actually happened, and my ex experienced it as well. We still bring it up from time to time. So I used to live on the EBCI reservation in the Smoky Mountains. There's a spot called Thomas Divide, and it's been known for decades to have unexplained floating orbs. You are supposed to pull off at that lookout, flash your light 3 times at the mountains, and wait. It's a known phenomenon that's even been written about. So one night, my ex and I decide to go check it out. We drive up to the pull-off at Night Park on the left side of the clearing, turn off the vehicle, flash our lights 3 times at the mountains below, and wait. It's dark, but the pull-off is basically a gravel clearing surrounded by woods, and the moon was full, so you could see the whole area very well. We could both see the entire area around the car, and there was no one else there. We both had our windows rolled down. Most of the pull-off area we are in is to my right since we pulled in more to the left, and we are facing towards the mountains. We were just talking, having a nice time, and my ex flashes his lights 3 times again since nothing had happened yet. I have my arm hanging out my window, and I'm looking up at the stars, and I loudly announce that this is stupid, and nothing is happening. Well, immediately after my announcement, we start hearing the sound of footsteps at the end of the clearing heading in our direction toward my side of the car. They were coming fast, but sounded light and quick, like they belonged to a small person, so maybe like a child running. I am a skeptic first, and figured there must be an explanation. It's quite bright from the moon, so I can see everything, but I'm just not seeing anything running in my direction. I can only hear the gravel crunching and the sound of footsteps. I start hanging out of my window, straining to see what could be heading in our direction, because obviously there must be an explanation, and I want to see what's coming towards us. The footsteps come right up to my car door, and something physically hits my door. I'm hanging out my window at this point, looking at my door and the ground next to it, and never saw a thing. However, whatever invisible thing that ran up to us hit my door with enough force that made a banging sound like someone had punched it, and the car rocked slightly. You could see and hear the impact, but could not see what made it. My ex's eyes got big and asked if that was me that did that. He thought I was playing with him, though he had heard the footsteps and knew those had nothing to do with me. I told him hell no, I didn't do that. So he reversed his car as fast as possible and sped out of there and back home as fast as he could. He was looking all around outside as well. Once he heard the footsteps, but he never saw what was making the footsteps either. He could only hear them. When I was 14, my brother took me on a weekend hiking trip through the Cahota Mountains. I'd never done more than a day hike near the base of the Appalachian Trail. So this was my first real backcountry experience. My brother and his buddies were veterans of the trail. They'd hiked the entire Appalachian Trail and knew all our tricks, how to pack light, how to read the terrain, and most importantly, how to store food at night. They used airtight bags hoisted up in a tree far from camping. I stuffed mine at the bottom of my sleeping bag, thinking sealed packaging meant it was safe. I didn't want to deal with ropes or trees. I was lazy and naive that night. I found out also how stupid I was. It started out with slow sniffing and wet breaths just outside our tent. I figured it was a raccoon, maybe a fox. Then something pressed its nose into the tent wall, inches from my face. Whatever it was big. I could feel its breath through the thin nylon. I smacked my brother away and pointed at the shape, bulging through the tent wall. Without a word, he pulled back and punched the spot as hard as he could. A low grunt and a heavy crash. Told us we'd scared it off. Probably a bear. We sat there trembling, heart hammering in my chest, but my brother just rolled over and went right back to sleep. But I couldn't. I lay there, eyes wide open, waiting to hear the crunch of footsteps returning. But what I heard next was Noranamon. I heard voices whispering. At first I thought maybe I was dreaming, but then I saw shadows moving outside the tent. 2, maybe 3 people crouched low. One of them was shining, a weak red flashlight sweeping the ground slowly. It was too quiet to be hikers. I couldn't make out much of what they were saying, just little bits. Sure, it was this rich. Wait till they fell asleep. Just grab it and go. I nudged my brother again, harder this time. He blinked until I whispered. There were people outside. He went still, and I could hear his breath catch. The shadows moved closer, and one of them stood right outside the tent, no more than 5 feet away. The red light hit our packs. He crouched down, fingers brushing one of the zippers. That's when my older brother did something I'll never forget. He roared loud, sudden, and deep like a wild animal. Then he unzipped the tent and came flying out with our camp hatchet, raised the flashlight beam jerked, and the guy screamed. A grown man screamed like a kid, and they bolted into the dark, crashing through the underbrush. My brother chased them for a second. Then he stopped. He was barefoot, still half asleep, but it worked, and they were gone. We packed up camp in record time, skipped breakfast, and just grabbed our gear, doused the flame, and started back down the trail. The sun wasn't even up yet. Later we found footprints. Not hiking boots, old sneakers. One of them had a hole in the heel, probably from dragging. We followed them for a bit, until they veered off into the woods towards no trail we knew of. They hadn't been out there for the scenery, or for my food either to this day. I don't know what they were planning. Robbery or something far worse. They knew we were alone though. Maybe they were just waiting until we were asleep. All I know is that if my brother hadn't reacted the way he did, it certainly would have gone very differently. Oh, and if you hike, hang your food, but also keep something sharp nearby. You might not be the only thing out there, and not everything that walks on two legs is friendly. Backpacking in the Sierra Nevada was supposed to be a peaceful escape, with just me and my two close friends. A few days in the wilderness, away from the noise and distraction of daily life. But that trip taught me firsthand that the mountains don't care about your plans. They're wild and unpredictable, and sometimes downright dangerous. This campground was attracting a sow bear with her two cubs. We'd heard the warnings from other hikers and rangers who stressed that mother bears with cubs were the most unpredictable kind of wildlife you can encounter. They're protective, and you don't want to surprise them or get between her and those cubs. We did everything by the book, used bear cans, hanged all scented items away from camp, and oddly leaving all the zippers open in our backpack so the bears could root through them without ripping them apart. We figured it was better for her to paw through a zipper than to tear through nylon trying to get a snack that night. 3 of us crammed into a small ultralight tent, shoulder to shoulder. The mother bear was right outside testing us. I froze. My heart slammed against my chest so hard, I thought it might burst. The bear was close enough that I could feel the heat of her body through the nylon, the rough scrape of her fur and claws as she shifted positions in the mountains. Your walls are thin. Your shelter can be as fragile as a whisper. And when a mother bear comes sniffing at your tent, you're starkly reminded that you are a guest in her home. For what felt like forever, we stayed, still holding our breaths, trying not to move or make a sound. We didn't want to bury her. We didn't want her to feel threatened. Finally, she wandered away, probably pulled by the scent of our food. We grabbed our metal parts and started banging them with everything we had, sending sharp echoes into the cold night air, and the bear retreated into the darkness. We didn't sleep after that. We stayed alert, staring into the shadows, beyond the tent, and listening to every snap of a twig or rustle of a leaf. That trip hammered home a lesson the mountains will always teach you. They are beautiful, but they are not forgiving. The weather can turn suddenly. The trails can disappear, and the wildlife you share the space with isn't there to entertain you. It's there to survive. A mother bear with cubs can be deadly, and you're never more than a few steps away from disaster. If you let your guard down, no matter how experienced you are, be careful out there. The Appalachian Trail has a way of stripping you down mentally, physically, and emotionally, and know it does it best. Like the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, that stretches exactly what it sounds like: remote, rugged, and extremely far from help, should you need it. I was with a small group nearing the tail end of our through hike. By that point, our feet were basically shredded leather, permanently damp, and so swollen from being wet from so long that it felt like the skin could peel off. Thin patches. Everyone was starving. You could mention a can of chili, and half the group would salivate. We had already been through hell one night. We had to hike straight through a hailstorm. Not sleet, not rain. Hail driven sideways by strong winds. We finally stumbled into a trail shelter, soaked and shivering, only to find it was crawling with mice. And I mean crawling tiny fly traps and rusts from every corner. You could see the shadows darting around in your headlamp beam. One ran across someone's sleeping bag, and we all just lay there exhausted, trying to pretend it wasn't happening. But none of that compared to what happened on the third day in the 100-mile. One of our group, an experienced hiker, ironically slipped on a muddy descent and broke their leg. It was bad. A clean snap where the pain is so sharp they can't even scream properly. Just short, panicked gasps. Of course, there was no cell reception and no nearby roads. Another member of our group shouldered a pack and sprinted uphill to the nearest ridgeline to try and get signal. After about an hour of climbing and waving a phone around like a divining rod, they finally got one. Just enough to call 911, and the call dropped 3 times. When help finally got through, they told us they couldn't get a helicopter in because it either wasn't available or they couldn't land safely in the terrain. So they flew a seaplane to the nearest lake, which was a mile from where we were. Let me say that again. A mile through dense forest and uneven terrain with someone who couldn't walk. When the rescue crew showed up, they weren't just calm, they were wild, tough as nails backward. Heroes in dirty canvas pants and giant boots who didn't hesitate. They picked up orange injured hiker, a fully grown adult, and just carried them piggyback style through the woods. There wasn't much room on the plane for anyone else, so the rest of us had to hike out, then hitchhike, then bus into town. And if that wasn't bad enough, our injured friend was discharged from the hospital without surgery, just told to go home and get it done there. Home was Michigan. On our way back, we stopped for the night at the cheap hotel. The only available rooms were on the 2nd floor, and of course, no elevator. We ended the day trying to carry a person with a broken leg up a flight of stairs, and the pouring rain with all is soaked through the whole trip was a disaster, but also one of the most unforgettable experiences about my life, where you learned a lot about people when you're wet, cold, starving, and stuck in the middle of nowhere. And you learn even more when help arrives, not on a chopper, but on a goddamn seaplane. This all happened back in 1985 and 1986. But these are things that my friend and I will never forget. I was working the summers at an old retreat in the North Carolina mountains with about 50 other young adults. It was great fun. While the place had lots of modern buildings, it was ruled over by a hulking white building built in 1912. I think it's important to note that most of the building is just an extension of the mountain itself. It was built using the trees from right where it stands, as well as the rocks and boulders used for the foundation. It's 3 stories, but really 5 counting the basement and the attic full of bats. It was great watching them pour out of there. Every night in front of the building is an enormous portico with white columns stretching up all 3 stories. That porch is full of rocking chairs from which you can see a majestic view of the Smoky Mountains. But the back of that building is where we worked. The back of the building was hugged by 2 large wings, forming a U-shaped back there. We entered our housekeeping facilities via a fire escape that stretched straight up to the 2nd floor rear entrance, a single green metal door. That door was one I knew. Well, housekeeping was my department for 3 summers, and even though this was now just the end of the first summer, I was well acquainted with it. It was big, green, metallic, and heavy as shit, with a pull on the outside and a bar to push up on the inside to open it. It did not stay open. In fact, fire regulations required it to stay closed at all times, and it was engineered to shut automatically. So of course, during the summer with no air conditioning in the building, we kept it propped open with a full bucket of water during the day. Regulations be damned. Sorry this is long, but I feel like all this info is important. A few nights before we all left, we were cleaning our dorms and trying to turn into a party when we all ran out of cleaning supplies. So around 9 o'clock at night, my best friend and I drove our lazy asses down to the back of the building. It was only a short distance, but there was a very steep incline. We didn't want to walk. I parked my car right in front of the stairs, and we got out. At this point, we both began to feel odd. The air was still and stuffy, and I felt positively enveloped by this building, standing in the middle, with those massive wings rising above us. The building was completely dark, and since we had been shutting it down for winter, it was already locked up tight. My friend had been with me earlier in the day when I had locked the door, the one at the top of the stairs. As we climbed the stairs, I felt positively oppressed and had to stop. My friend did too. I told him I was scared, and he admitted the same. I'd never felt scared of this building before, and I had spent plenty of time in it alone, exploring the basement and attic. We pressed slowly forward again, and a few steps up, I literally felt an icy chill down my spine. I know it's a stupid cliche, but I've never felt anything like it before or since. Like someone pressed an icicle down the length of my spine. Finally, we reached the top of the stairs, and the instant I put my foot on the top, landing, the fricking door swung wide open and stood open for us, revealing the short entranceway, bathed in the red light of the exit sign. It wanted us in there, and we both felt it, but it did not feel welcoming at all. In fact, I've never been more scared of anything in my life. I get freaked out about it now. 37 years later, we both just stood there completely stunned for what felt like minutes before I completely freaked out, started screaming incoherently, and scrambled down the steps, jumping way too many on the way down. We both ran up the steep incline, yelling and screaming, leaving my car behind. Everyone came down and searched the building with us. It was empty, of course, and the door was shut, fast and locked. When we got back, no one could have pushed that door open and run away without us hearing them. The floors squeaked when you walked on them, and someone running would have been very loud. I have looked at this from every angle I can think of, but I still have no explanation for what happened. I worked there for 3 more summers in that building and have many more stories. My friend stayed to work through the winter, 1 year, and saw the Hat Man in the same building. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Do you know what I found the other day? 3 Morty's Media shirts from old giveaways that either never claimed or I just never gave away. Maybe no one actually won them, so I've got these 3 shirts just sitting in the plastic, and I wonder, would anyone here be interested in them? Let's say, for example, we did some fun giveaway in the next few videos. Would you guys be keen to receive them? Maybe I can make a little pack or something. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you are so inclined. I'd also like to give a huge thank you, as always, to Pubs Care for joining me into tonight's collection of horrors. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to let me know. But that's it from me. Links to his channel and more content can be found on screen now. Stay on and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.